For 45 years, my wife, Martha, told me she was going to the bank every Monday morning just to pay the household bills and organize her coupons. I believed her because I was a retired structural engineer who trusted his wife completely. I handed over my paycheck every week and never asked questions. But as I stood at her funeral, with rain soaking through my cheap black suit, my son handed me a brochure for a state-run nursing home and told me I had 48 hours to leave the house I built with my own hands. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a senile old man they could throw away like garbage. They had no idea that the small silver key Martha left behind would unlock a secret worth $28 million and a plan for revenge that would bring them to their knees. Before I tell you how I destroyed their greed and got back my dignity, please hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been underestimated by your own family or if you have ever had to fight for what was yours. My name is Henry Caldwell, and I am 70 years old. I have lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, my entire life. I worked hard, I paid my taxes, and I loved my family with everything I had. But as I stood there in the muddy grass of Allegheny Cemetery, watching the workers lower the mahogany casket into the wet earth, I realized that love is not always a two-way street. The pastor had finished his final prayer. The few friends who had braved the weather were heading back to their cars, quietly sharing their condolences as they passed me. I stood alone by the open grave, my hands holding the brim of my hat, waiting. I was waiting for my children to come over. I was waiting for a hand on my shoulder. I was waiting for my son, Lucas, or my daughter, Emily, to hug me and tell me that we would get through this together. Instead, I watched them standing 10 yards away under a cluster of large black umbrellas. They weren't crying. They were huddled in a tight circle, whispering. Lucas, my eldest son at 42, kept checking his watch as if he had a train to catch. Emily, my youngest, was busy typing something on her phone, her face lit by the glow of the screen. And then there was Tanya, my daughter-in-law, Lucas's wife. She was looking right at me, not with sympathy, but with a cold calculation that made me shiver more than the freezing rain. I took a step toward them, my knees ticking in the damp cold. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to sit in my armchair, smell the lingering scent of Martha's lavender perfume, and maybe drink a glass of that wine I had been saving for our golden anniversary. I needed comfort. But before I could even open my mouth to ask for a ride home, Tanya broke away from the group and marched toward me. Her heels sank into the soft ground with every step, but she didn't seem to care. Henry, she said. She didn't call me Dad or Pop, just Henry. We need to talk about the logistics. I looked at her, confused. My wife had been in the ground for less than 10 minutes. Logistics? Tanya, I said, my voice rough from days of silent grief. Can't this wait until we get home?
I'm tired.
That is exactly the point, she interrupted, cutting me off with a sharp wave of her hand. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was damp from the rain, but I could clearly see the logo. It was a brochure for Shady Pines, a budget assisted living facility on the outskirts of the city, a place known for smelling like bleach and despair. What is this? I asked, my hands trembling as I took the paper. It is a brochure for your new arrangements, Tanya said, her voice empty of emotion. Look, Henry, we have to be realistic here. You are 70 years old. Your pension is peanuts. It barely covers your medication, let alone the heating bill for that big, drafty house. Martha was the one who managed the money. Martha was the one who kept things running. Without her, you are going to be destitute in 3 months. I felt the blood rush to my face. I stared at Lucas, who was now standing behind his wife, looking down at his shoes. Lucas, I said, looking for my son. What is she talking about? That is my house. I built the deck with my own hands. I paid the mortgage for 30 years. Lucas finally looked up, but his eyes slid away from mine. He looked weak. He always looked weak when Tanya was around. "Dad," he mumbled. "It's complicated. The house, well, the deed was in Mom's name. You know that. And 6 months ago, when she got really sick, she signed a power of attorney and transferred the title to us, to the estate." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I tried to process his words. Martha had transferred the house without telling me? No, that was impossible. We were partners. We did it to protect the asset. Tanya jumped in, stepping between me and my son. "If you got sick, the government would take the house to pay for your care. We saved it. But now, with Martha gone, we have to liquidate. We have expenses. Henry, Lucas has business debts. Emily needs money for her kids' tuition. We can't afford to let you sit alone in a 4-bedroom house eating up our inheritance." Our inheritance. The words hung in the cold air. They weren't talking about my home. They were talking about their payday. "We have already contacted a real estate agent," Tanya continued, checking her manicured nails. "She is coming on Monday morning to take photos for the listing. That gives you 48 hours to pack your personal effects. We will hire a crew to clear out the rest of the junk next week." "Junk?" I whispered. "You mean our life? You mean your mother's things?" "It is just stuff, Henry," Tanya snapped. "Don't be dramatic. We found a room at Shady Pines that fits your budget. It is semi-private, so you will have a roommate, which is good for socialization. The truck comes Sunday night to take you there. It is all arranged." I looked at Emily. She was still on her phone, pretending none of this was happening. I looked at Lucas. He looked like he wanted to disappear. And I looked at Tanya, who was smiling, tight and victorious. The smile I had come to hate over the years. "You can't do this," I said, gripping the wet brochure until it tore. "I am your father. I am your grandfather. You can't just throw me out on the street." "We aren't throwing you on the street," Tanya sighed, like she was explaining something simple to a child. "We are putting you in a home. It is safe. It is responsible. And frankly, Henry, it is what Martha would have wanted. She wouldn't want you to be a burden on us." That was the line that broke something inside me. A burden. For 45 years, I worked overtime. I drove used cars so they could have new ones. I skipped vacations so they could go to camp. I gave them everything. And now, standing over my wife's grave, they were discarding me like a piece of broken furniture. I straightened my back. The pain in my knees was still there, but a cold fire was starting to burn in my chest. I looked Tanya dead in the eye. "You are giving me 48 hours?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "Sunday night. Be ready." She turned on her heel and started walking back to their car. Lucas mumbled a quick, "Sorry, Dad," and followed her like a trained puppy. Emily didn't even say goodbye. She just got in the back seat of Lucas's car and slammed the door. I stood there in the rain for a long time. I watched their taillights fade into the mist. I looked down at the fresh dirt covering Martha. I had never felt so alone, so small, so betrayed in my entire life. I was 70 years old. I had less than $2,000 in my checking account. I had no home. I had no family. But as I turned to walk toward my old, rusted sedan, I remembered something. I remembered the way Martha used to look at me when I worried about money. I remembered her strange little habit of locking her desk drawer every time she left the room. And I remembered the calendar in the kitchen where every Monday, for as long as I could remember, she had written the same 3 words. Bank 9 a.m. I wiped the rain from my face. They thought I was finished. They thought I was just an old man they could bully. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to Shady Pines. I was going home. And I was going to find out exactly what my wife had been doing every Monday for 45 years. Because if I knew Martha, she didn't leave me defenseless. She left me a map. And I was going to follow it even if it led me straight to hell. The drive back from the cemetery felt like the longest trip of my life. I drove my rusted sedan through the rain-sick streets of Pittsburgh, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every turn brought me closer to a house that was supposed to be my safe place, but now felt like a battlefield. I pulled into the driveway, and my stomach dropped. The front door was wide open. It gaped like a wound, exposing the safety of my home to the cold, damp air. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain pound against the roof, trying to gather the strength to walk through that door. I knew what was waiting for me inside, but knowing didn't make it any easier. I stepped out of the car and walked up the path I had paved with my own hands 20 years ago. The sound of voices drifted out from the open door. They were loud, casual, and showed no respect for the day. I stepped over the threshold, and the sight that greeted me stole the breath from my lungs. My living room, the place where Martha and I had watched our children grow up, looked like a flea market. Cabinet doors were thrown wide open. Drawers were pulled out and dumped onto the floor. My children were not mourning. They were shopping. I walked farther in, water dripping from my coat onto the hardwood floor. Emily was on her knees in front of the display cabinet. She had a large canvas tote bag open next to her, and she was carefully clearing out the shelves. I watched her hand wrap around the silver tea set. That set belonged to Martha's grandmother. It was the pride of her collection, something she only brought out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Emily was shoving the pieces into the bag without care, clinking metal against metal. "Emily," I said, my voice rough, "what are you doing? Put that back." She didn't even flinch. She didn't look at me. She just kept grabbing the silver forks and spoons. "I am taking these for safekeeping, Dad," she said, her tone dismissive. "Mom promised them to me years ago. Besides, you don't use them. They will just tarnish if they stay here. I need to get them appraised. The market for silver is good right now." Praised. She was selling her mother's heirlooms before the funeral flowers had even wilted. I wanted to scream, but a sound from the kitchen made me spin around. A sharp pop of a cork. I rushed into the kitchen and saw Lucas leaning against the counter. He was holding a bottle of wine. My heart seized in my chest. It wasn't just any bottle. It was the vintage Bordeaux I had bought 30 years ago. I had stored it in the coolest part of the basement, turning it carefully, saving it for our golden anniversary. It was the symbol of our endurance. And there was Lucas, pouring the deep red liquid into a chipped coffee mug as if it were cheap soda. "Lucas, no!" I shouted, moving faster than my old legs should have allowed. "That is not for you. That was for your mother and me." Lucas took a long swig from the mug and grimaced. He looked at me with glazed, indifferent eyes. "Relax, Dad," he said, wiping his mouth. "It is vinegar anyway. You waited too long to open it. It is spoiled just like everything else in this house. It is all old junk." I reached out and snatched the bottle from his hand, spilling wine onto the linoleum. It looked like blood. "Get out!" I yelled, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in decades. "Both of you, get out of my house. These are my things. This is my wife's home. You have no right to touch a single thing." Slow clapping started from the hallway behind me. I turned to see Tanya standing there. She looked perfect in her black designer dress, untouched by the rain or the grief. She was holding Martha's jewelry box, the one I had carved from mahogany for her 10th birthday. She looked at me with a smirk that chilled me to the bone. "Oh, Henry," she said, shaking her head like she was scolding a child. "You really are confused, aren't you?" She walked into the kitchen, the click of her heels sharp against the floor. She placed the jewelry box on the table and crossed her arms. "You keep saying my house and my things," Tanya said. "But let's look at reality. You were a structural engineer, sure, but you retired 15 years ago. Your pension is pathetic. It barely covers the heating bill. I stared at her, the empty wine bottle heavy in my hand. I worked for 40 years, I said, my voice low. I gave everything to this family. Exactly, Tanya interrupted. You gave everything. Specifically, you gave every single paycheck to Martha. You handed it over because you didn't want to deal with the finances. You trusted her completely. You never put your name on the investment accounts. You never checked the deed transfers. You let her handle the business while you played the simple, happy husband. She took a step closer, her perfume overpowering the smell of the spilled wine. Martha was the one who managed the money in this family, Henry. And now that she is gone, the assets belong to the estate, which means they belong to the heirs, Lucas and Emily, not you. You are a dependent, Henry. You have been living off her management for years. We are just liquidating our inheritance before you waste it all on medical bills or sentimental nonsense. I looked at Lucas. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just poured more wine into his mug. I looked at Emily in the other room, who was now taking the paintings off the walls. I realized then that I was completely alone. I had trusted my wife with everything, believing our partnership was unbreakable. I never imagined I would need to protect myself from my own children. They stripped me of my dignity in my own kitchen. They made me feel small, foolish, and powerless. I was not the patriarch. I was an obstacle. Couldn't breathe. The air in the house felt thick with greed. I couldn't fight them physically. I couldn't argue with their twisted logic, not when I was frozen by grief. I needed to escape. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the kitchen, past the living room where my life was being packed into cardboard boxes. I walked down the hallway to the end, to the one room they hadn't invaded yet, Martha's sewing room and office. I stepped inside and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the brass lock, hearing the click that separated me from the vultures outside. The room was dark and quiet. It smelled of lavender and old paper. I leaned back against the door and slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I sat there in the dark, listening to them rummage through my life, realizing that the woman I loved was gone and the family I built was an illusion. I was a prisoner in the house I had paid for with my sweat and blood. But as I sat there, my hand brushed the pocket of my jacket, feeling the cold metal of the key I had found earlier. They thought I was finished. They thought I was just a poor old man. They had no idea what Monday morning would bring. I sat on the floor of Martha's sewing room for what felt like hours. The noise from the rest of the house had finally died down. My children and my daughter-in-law had left, taking with them the silver, the wine, and my dignity, leaving behind only the echo of their cruelty and the threat of my eviction. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the steady rhythm of the rain against the window pane. I pulled myself up, my joints protesting with every movement. I couldn't just sit here and wait for the movers to drag me to a nursing home. I needed ammunition. I needed proof. I turned on the small brass desk lamp. The pool of yellow light lit Martha's sanctuary. This room was the one place in the house that was completely hers. It was where she mended my work shirts, where she balanced the checkbook, and where she spent hours organizing the life I took for granted. I walked over to the gray metal filing cabinet in the corner. If there was a deed, a title, or a document that proved I owned this house, it had to be here. I pulled open the top drawer. It groaned on its tracks. Inside, everything was carefully labeled in Martha's neat cursive handwriting. Utilities, insurance, medical, taxes. I started pulling files, my hands shaking as I flipped through pages of receipts and statements. I found electric bills going back 10 years. I found the warranty for the water heater we replaced in 2015. I found every single tax return we had filed since 1980. But as I dug deeper, a cold realization settled in my stomach. I couldn't find the deed. I couldn't find the mortgage discharge papers. I found the property tax records, but when I looked closely at the most recent one, my breath caught in my throat. The name listed on the owner line wasn't Henry and Martha Caldwell. It was the Martha Caldwell Revocable Trust. The transfer date was 6 months ago. Tanya hadn't been lying. My wife, the woman I trusted with my life, had signed away our home without saying a word to me. "Why, Martha?" I whispered to the empty room. "Why did you do this?" I slammed the drawer shut, the metallic clang ringing in my ears. I felt a surge of betrayal so sharp it nearly dropped me to my knees. Was I truly just a dependent to her? Did she think I was too helpless to handle our affairs? I turned away from the cabinet, my eyes scanning the room for anything else. Any clue that would make sense of this madness. My eyes landed on the bookshelf above her sewing table. Lined up perfectly were dozens of small, leather-bound pocket calendars. Martha never used a smartphone or a computer to track her days. She wrote everything down. I reached up and pulled down the one from this year. I opened it to the current week. It was blank except for the date of her death, which she obviously hadn't planned. I flipped back a few months. Doctor appointment, grocery, church committee, normal, ordinary entries. I pulled down the calendar from the previous year, then the one from 5 years ago, then 10. I started laying them out on the sewing table, opening them to random months. I was looking for a pattern, even though I didn't know what it was. And then I saw it. It started in 1979. On the first Monday of January, in blue ink, she had written 3 words. 9 a.m. meet P. I checked the next Monday. 9 a.m. meet P. I checked a Monday in July of 1985. 9 a.m. meet P. I checked a Monday in October of 1999. 9 a.m. meet P. I frantically opened every single planner, my heart racing faster with each page I turned. Every single Monday for 45 years, Martha had an appointment at 9 o'clock in the morning with someone named P. She never missed a week. Not when the kids were sick. Not when it snowed. Not even on holidays, though on those days the entry was moved to Tuesday. Who was P? A dark, poisonous thought entered my mind. Was it a man? Was it a lover? I tried to push the thought away, but the consistency was terrifying. I closed my eyes and tried to remember our Mondays. For as long as I could remember, Monday mornings were sacred to Martha. She would get up early, dressed in her nice Sunday clothes, and tell me she was going to the market or to meet a friend for coffee. I remembered one specific Monday in 1992. I had the day off work because of a sight injury. I asked her if I could come with her, maybe grab breakfast together. I remembered the way she stiffened. She had smiled, patted my cheek and said, "Oh, Henry, you would be bored to tears. It is just errands. You stay here and rest your back." She never let me come. Not once in 45 years. I looked at the wall of calendars. This wasn't a grocery run. You don't schedule groceries for 9 a.m. sharp for 4 decades. This was a secret life. I sat down at her sewing table, feeling the weight of 45 years of possible lies crushing me. My hand brushed the underside of the tabletop. It was an antique Singer base, heavy cast iron and solid oak. Martha loved this table. She spent more time here than anywhere else. My fingers grazed something uneven on the wood beneath the drawer. I frowned and ducked my head to look under the table. The wood was smooth, but there was a seam that didn't look right. It looked like a panel. I pressed on it, but it wouldn't move. I ran my fingers along the edge until I felt a small indentation. A latch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed a letter opener from her pencil cup and wedged it into the seam. I shouldn't be doing this. This was her private space. But she was gone, and she had left me in a burning house with no exit. I needed to know who P was. I needed to know if my entire marriage had been a lie. I pushed the letter opener hard. There was a sharp crack of splintering wood, and a small, shallow drawer dropped down from the underside of the table. It was a hidden compartment. My breath caught. Inside the compartment, there was no money. There were no love letters. There was only one object resting on velvet lining. It was a key. I reached out and picked it up. It was heavy, made of old, tarnished brass, cold to the touch. It wasn't a house key or a car key. It was long, with complex teeth and a rounded head. Stamped into the metal on one side was the number 404. On the other side was a logo I recognized instantly, though it was worn down by years of handling. It was the logo of First City Bank, the oldest bank in Pittsburgh. I stared at the key, my mind racing to connect the dots. First City Bank, Box 404, 9 a.m. Meet P wasn't a person. P was a place or a person at a place. Paxton. Mr. Paxton was the branch manager at First City. He had been there since I was a young man. Martha wasn't meeting a lover. She was going to the bank. But why? We had a joint checking account at a different bank, a small credit union near my old job. We never banked at First City. Why would she go there every week? Why would she hide the key in a secret compartment under her sewing table? And why, for the love of God, did she never tell me? I gripped the key so hard the edges dug into my palm. This key was the answer. It had to be. It was the only thing she had hidden. The calendars were the map, and this key was the destination. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The bank wouldn't open for another 6 hours. 6 hours of agonizing waiting. 6 hours of wondering if I was about to discover a fortune or a debt that would bury me. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, wet street. My car was still there, parked where I left it. The house was quiet now, stripped of its treasures, hollowed out by my children's greed. But in my hand, I held a piece of metal that felt like hope. Or maybe it was a weapon. Martha didn't do things without a reason. She was the most practical woman I had ever known. She wouldn't hide a key for 45 years unless it opened something that mattered. I thought about Tanya's smirk. I thought about Lucas pouring my wine down his throat. I thought about the nursing home brochure. They thought the story was over. They thought they had won. I squeezed the brass key in my fist. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to shower, shave, and put on my best suit, the one I wore to the funeral. And at 9 a.m. sharp, just like my wife had done for nearly half a century, I was going to meet P. If there was a secret in Box 404, I was going to find it. And if that secret gave me even a sliver of power, a fraction of leverage, I was going to use it. My grief was slowly being replaced by a cold, hard determination. You left me a trail, Martha, I whispered to the rain-streaked glass. I am going to follow it, and God help anyone who tries to stop me. I turned off the lamp, leaving the room in darkness. But for the first time since she died, I didn't feel lost. I had a mission. The sun would rise soon, and with it, the truth. I walked out of the room, locking the door behind me, the brass key burning a hole in my pocket, waiting for Monday morning. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The rain hadn't stopped since the funeral, turning the city into a gray, weeping landscape. I stood outside the heavy glass doors of First City Bank, smoothing the lapels of my black suit. It was the same suit I had worn to bury my wife 3 days ago, and frankly, it was the only suit I owned that still fit. It smelled faintly of mothballs and damp wool, a scent that clung to me like a second skin. I caught my reflection in the polished glass. I looked terrible. My eyes were rimmed with red, sunken deep into a face marked by 70 years of hard work and fresh grief. My white hair was combed, but the wind had already messed it up. I didn't look like a man coming to handle serious business. I looked like a man coming to ask for a loan extension, or maybe just trying to get out of the rain. I looked like exactly what Tanya said I was. a burden, a relic. I took a deep breath, clutching the cold brass key in my pocket so hard it hurt. This was it, the end of the trail Martha had left me. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the lobby. The bank was huge, smelling of floor wax and money. High ceilings, marble floors, and the quiet hum of business. It was intimidating. A security guard near the entrance took one look at me and took a half step forward. He was young, built like a linebacker, with a headset and a look of practiced suspicion. His eyes ran over my scuffed shoes and my frayed cuffs. I could see him doing the math. Is this guy homeless? Is he going to cause trouble? I straightened my spine and walked past him, trying to show confidence I didn't feel. I headed straight for the teller line. It was empty, thankfully. I walked up to the window where a young woman with perfectly straightened hair and a name tag that read Jessica was typing on her computer. She didn't look up right away. She let me stand there for a good 10 seconds. A quiet power move I had seen 1,000 times. "Can I help you, sir?" she finally asked, her voice tight and professional, but her eyes still on her screen. Cleared my throat. "Good morning. I am here about a safe deposit box." Jessica finally looked at me. Her gaze flickered over my appearance with the same dismissal as the guard. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I have a key." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key. I placed it on the cold marble counter. The sound was a dull thud that seemed too loud in the quiet bank. Jessica sighed, clearly annoyed. "Sir, for box access you need to see a service representative, and they are fully booked until—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes had landed on the key. She stared at it. Then she leaned closer, her perfect composure cracking just a little. She reached out a finger and touched the number stamped into the metal. 404. Then she looked at the old, worn logo on the head of the key. Her face went pale. The annoyance vanished, replaced by something that looked a lot like alarm. She looked up at me, really looked at me this time, searching my face. "What is your name, sir?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Henry," I said. "Henry Caldwell." She typed my name into her computer with fast, jerky movements. A moment later, she stopped. Her hand went to the phone on her desk. She didn't dial an extension. She pressed a single red button on the console. "Please wait here, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Do not leave." She picked up the receiver and spoke into it. Her hand covered the mouthpiece so I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I saw her eyes darting back to me every few seconds. My heart began to pound against my ribs. This was it. This was the bad news. Martha had left a debt. Some huge, impossible debt that needed immediate security. Or maybe the box was flagged for something illegal. Maybe she had been involved in something I couldn't even imagine. Panic rose in my throat, tasting like bile. I imagined the police coming through those doors. I imagined Tanya's face when she found out I had been arrested at the bank. I imagined losing not just the house, but my freedom. I looked around, ready to grab the key and run, but my legs felt like lead. I was frozen. Then I heard footsteps. Fast, heavy footsteps, coming from the executive offices at the back of the bank. I turned and saw a man rushing toward me. He wasn't security. He was older, maybe 65, wearing an immaculate navy suit that probably cost more than my car. He had silver hair and an air of authority that commanded the room. People stopped what they were doing to watch him. He was practically running across the marble floor, ignoring other customers, ignoring the staff. He was heading straight for me. I braced myself. I prepared for an accusation. I prepared to be escorted out. "Mr. Caldwell," the man boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. He stopped in front of me, slightly out of breath. He looked at my face, studying it with an intensity that made me want to shrink away. Then his expression softened. A look of deep sadness and recognition washed over his features. "Mr. Caldwell," he repeated, softer this time. "I am Charles Paxton, the branch manager." Paxton. The man from the calendar. Before I could say a word, this stranger, this powerful banker, did something that shocked the entire lobby. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me in a tight, real embrace. He hugged me like a long-lost brother. I stood there stiff and confused, my arms pinned to my sides, smelling his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of old paper. "We have been waiting for you, Henry," he whispered near my ear. "Martha told me you would come. She said you would be here the first Monday after she passed." He pulled back and held me by the shoulders, looking me in the eye. His own eyes were shining. "I am so incredibly sorry for your loss," he said. "She was a remarkable woman, truly remarkable." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I was too stunned. The teller, Jessica, was staring at us with her mouth slightly open. The security guard had lowered his stance, looking confused. "Mr. Paxton," I finally managed to croak. "I found this key. I don't know what it is for. I don't know if she owes you money or—" Paxton let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Owe us money? Oh, Henry. No. Come with me, please." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the teller. "Jessica, close your station. Bring the key." He put a hand on my back, gentle but firm, guiding me away from the public counter. He led me toward a set of double oak doors that were usually guarded by a keypad and a camera. As we approached, he swiped his badge, and the doors clicked open. We walked through, leaving the noise of the lobby behind. The air back here was different, cooler, quieter. We walked down a plush, carpeted hallway lined with oil paintings of serious-looking men from the 19th century. Employees in glass-walled offices looked up as we passed, their eyes widening when they saw the branch manager escorting a man in a shabby funeral suit. "Where are we going?" I asked, my anxiety rising again. "To the vault," Paxton said. "To the private vault. Not the one downstairs for the public. The one for our legacy clients."
Legacy client.
The words meant nothing to me. I was a man who clipped coupons for canned soup. I wasn't a legacy client. We reached a heavy steel door at the end of the hall. Paxton placed his hand on a biometric scanner. A green light flashed, and the heavy tumblers shifted with a deep, echoing clank. He pulled the door open and ushered me inside. It was a small room lined from floor to ceiling with stainless steel boxes of different sizes. In the center was one wooden table with 2 chairs and a lamp. It felt like a confession room or an interrogation room. Paxton walked to a specific section of the wall. He scanned the numbers, 401, 402, 403. He stopped at 404. It was a large box, much bigger than the standard ones. He turned to me. "Do you have the key, Henry?" I realized the key was in my hand. I had never let go of it. I handed it to him. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. Paxton took a key from his own pocket, a master key. He put both keys into the 2 locks on the box. He turned them at the same time. Click. He pulled the long metal drawer out of the wall. It was heavy. I could see the strain in his arms as he carried it to the table and set it down with a solid thud. He pointed to the chair. "Sit down, Henry," he said. I stared at the gray metal box. It looked like a coffin for secrets. "Mr. Paxton," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Please just tell me. Is it bad? Did she do something wrong?" Paxton looked at me with a mix of pity and admiration. "Wrong, Henry? Your wife was the most disciplined, intelligent, and visionary person I have ever banked with. For 45 years, she came here every Monday. She sat in my office. We drank tea. And she built an empire. Empire. I repeated the word, but it made no sense. Paxton reached out and flipped the lid of the box open. I braced myself for the worst, but when I looked inside, I didn't see piles of cash. I didn't see stolen jewelry. I saw paper. Stacks and stacks of thick, cream-colored paper with watermarks and gold seals. Certificates, deeds, bonds. I reached in and picked up the top document. It was a stock certificate for a technology company I recognized right away. A company that started in a garage in the 80s and now ruled the world. The date on the certificate was 1984. The number of shares was shocking. I picked up another, a deed to a commercial building in downtown Pittsburgh. Another deed for an apartment complex in Shadyside. I looked up at Paxton, my vision blurring. "What is this?" "This," Paxton said softly, "is what she did with the $50 a week you gave her. She didn't just save it, Henry. She invested it. She played the long game. She bought when everyone was selling. She held when everyone was panicking. She built this for you. For me. For us," he corrected. "But mostly for you. She knew you worried about money. She knew you carried the weight of the family on your shoulders. She wanted to make sure that when the time came, you would never have to worry again." I looked back at the box. It was full. It was overflowing. "How much?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Paxton took a breath. "We did a valuation last week, as per her instructions, when she knew the end was coming. The current value of the portfolio, including the real estate holdings and the diversified stock, is approximately $28 million. The room spun. The silence of the vault roared in my ears. $28 million. I was a man being evicted by his children because I couldn't afford a nursing home. And sitting on this table was enough money to buy the nursing home and burn it down. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the papers, feeling tears run hot and fast down my cheeks. My wife wasn't just a housewife. She was a titan, and she had hidden it all. She had lived a humble life, worn old coats, and cooked simple meals, all to build this. But why? Why didn't she tell me? "Because she knew," Paxton said, answering the question I hadn't asked. "She knew your children, and she knew that if they knew about the money, they would destroy you to get it. She protected you, Henry, until the very end." He reached into the box again and pulled out something else. A small black leather notebook. "And she left you this," he said. "She called it her black ledger. She said you would need it for what comes next." I took the book, felt heavy in my hand. I opened the cover. On the first page, in Martha's familiar, steady handwriting, were the words, "For Henry. Use this when they show you who they really are." I ran my thumb over the ink. I thought of Tanya's face at the cemetery. I thought of the empty shelves in my living room. Martha knew. She knew exactly what they would do, and she had armed me. I looked up at Paxton. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. In their place was something cold and hard and powerful. "Mr. Paxton," I said, closing the book, "I think I need to speak to a lawyer." Paxton smiled, a shark-like grin that told me he was on my side. "I have the best estate attorney in the state waiting in my office, Henry. Shall we go meet him?" I stood up, smoothing my old suit. I didn't feel like a beggar anymore. I felt like the man my wife knew I could be. "Lead the way," I said. The heavy steel door of the private viewing room clicked shut behind us, sealing out the rest of the world with a final sound that made my ears pop. The silence in the room was complete, thick with the scent of old dust and polished metal. Paxton placed the long gray metal box on the mahogany table. It sat there like a monument, cold and unwelcoming. I stared at it, my hands gripping the armrests of the leather chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. I was terrified. Part of me still expected to see a mountain of unpaid bills, gambling debts, or maybe letters from a secret family that would ruin the memory of the woman I loved. Paxton stood on the other side of the table, his expression serious but kind. He didn't rush me. He waited until I gave a small, almost invisible nod. Then, with respectful slowness, he reached out and lifted the lid of box 404. I leaned forward, bracing myself for the worst. But there were no stacks of cash. There were no diamonds or gold bars. There were no bundles of angry letters stamped with red overdue notices. Instead, the box was filled to the brim with paper. Thick, cream-colored envelopes held stacks of documents with raised seals and files organized with the same careful detail Martha had applied to her recipe box. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice sounding thin in the quiet room. Paxton reached in and pulled out the first stack. He set it gently in front of me. "It is history, Henry," he said softly. "It is the history of the last 45 years. I reached out and touched the top document. The paper felt heavy and expensive. It was a stock certificate. I recognized the name of the company immediately. It was a local steel mill, one of the giants that built Pittsburgh, but the date on the certificate was from 1976. I looked at another, an oil company in Texas. Then another, a technology firm from California that started in a garage in the 80s. I looked up at Paxton, confusion filling my mind. "I don't understand. We didn't have money for stocks. We lived paycheck to paycheck. I gave her my check every week, and she gave me 50 for gas and lunch. That was it." Paxton smiled, real admiration in his eyes. "Henry, do you remember that 50 a week you handed her for the household surplus? The money you told her to keep for a rainy day?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I thought she used it for groceries or for the kids' clothes." "She didn't," Paxton said. "She stretched the rest of your paycheck to cover the bills. She clipped coupons. She mended clothes. She made meals out of nothing. And that 50 every single Monday morning, she walked into my office and deposited it. But she didn't leave it in a savings account to rot with inflation. She invested it." He gestured to the papers. "She bought steel when everyone said the industry was dying. She bought tech stocks when people said computers were just a fad. She bought land on the outskirts of the city when it was just dirt and weeds, years before the developers came. She had an instinct, Henry, and I have never seen in a professional broker, let alone a housewife from the suburbs. She didn't spend a dime. She reinvested every dividend. She let compound interest work its magic for 4.5 decades. I looked back down at the papers. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. I picked up a deed to a commercial complex downtown. I picked up a statement from a mutual fund that had grown unbelievably. "So, this is worth what? A few $100,000. I asked, trying to understand the size of it. "That would be enough to save the house. That would be enough to keep me out of the nursing home." Paxton took a deep breath. He walked around the table and stood beside me. "Henry, we ran the valuation last week, just before she passed. She wanted an up-to-date figure for you." He placed a single sheet of paper on top of the pile. There was a number printed at the bottom in bold black ink. I stared at it. I blinked, sure my old eyes were failing me. I counted the commas. I counted the zeros. 28,450,000. The room seemed to tilt. The air thinned. Couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I was trapped in a moment that didn't make sense. 28 million. I was a man who had worn the same winter coat for 12 years. I was a man who was being evicted by his own son because I couldn't afford the property taxes on a modest 3-bedroom house. I was a man who had felt like a failure, a burden, a parasite living off his wife's management. And all this time I was a millionaire. "I am not a burden," I whispered, the truth hitting me harder than the grief. "No, Henry," Paxton said firmly. "You were the engine. You earned the money. You worked long hours in the cold and the rain. You broke your back on those bridges. Martha always said that. She said she was just the steward. You were the source. She took your sweat and turned it into an empire. She did this for you. A tear rolled down my cheek, hot and heavy. Then another. And then I broke. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. I didn't cry for the money. I didn't cry for the luxury I missed or the vacations we never took. I cried for her. I cried for the woman who loved me enough to deny herself everything so I would never have to be afraid. She wore old shoes so I could have the security. She let our children think we were poor so they wouldn't become spoiled, though God knows that didn't work out the way she hoped. She carried this secret alone for 45 years. She walked into this bank every Monday, played the game of high finance, and then went home to cook pot roast and listen to me complain about the price of heating oil. She was a giant, and I had never truly known her. I sat there for a long time, letting the tears wash away the shame of the last few days. I wasn't a senile old man. I wasn't a charity case. I was the husband of Martha Caldwell, and together we had conquered the world without anyone knowing. Eventually, the tears slowed. I wiped my face with a rough handkerchief. I looked at the box again. It wasn't just paper. It was armor. It was a weapon. Is that all of it? I asked, my voice steadier now. Not quite, Paxton said. He reached into the very back of the metal box and pulled out a small black leather notebook. It was worn at the edges, the binding cracked from use. It looked like a cheap diary. She wanted you to see the assets first, Paxton said, handing me the book. But she said this was more important. She called it her black ledger. I took the book. It felt heavier than the millions in stock certificates. What is inside? I asked. The truth, Paxton replied, his face darkening slightly. Martha didn't just track the markets, Henry. She tracked everything. She knew your children better than they knew themselves. And she knew that one day you would need to see them clearly, without a father's love covering your eyes. I opened the cover. The first page was written in Martha's familiar, steady handwriting. It was dated 20 years ago. It started with a name, Lucas, and next to it an amount of money, and next to that, a reason. My blood ran cold as I read the first entry. I turned the page, then the next. It wasn't a diary. It was a list of debts, a list of sins. I looked up at Paxton. My grief was shrinking, replaced by a sharp, cold clarity. She knew, I said. She knew what they were. She knew, Paxton agreed. And she gave you the power to deal with them. I closed the black book and set it on top of the millions. I stood up. The old man who walked into this bank 30 minutes ago was gone. He died in this vault. The man standing here now was someone else. Mr. Paxton, I said, I think I need to make a withdrawal, and then I need to see a lawyer. Paxton smiled, a shark-like grin that told me the real game was just beginning. I have the best estate attorney in the city waiting in conference room B, Henry. He has been on retainer for this moment for 5 years. I smoothed down my jacket. I picked up the black ledger. Let's go, I said. I have a family reunion to plan. Paxton led me out of the vault and into his private office on the top floor. It was quiet and luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray, weeping city of Pittsburgh. He poured me a glass of water from a crystal carafe, but I didn't drink it. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, the black notebook resting on my knees like a heavy stone. Paxton sat behind his desk, watching me with the same patient, knowing expression. He didn't push me to open it. He knew what I was about to read would change how I saw my family forever. I took a deep breath and opened the cover. The first page was dated October 14th, 2010. I remembered that year. It was a hard year. The economy was down, and Lucas had just started his own contracting business. I remembered him coming to us pale and shaking, saying he had been in a fender bender and needed help with the insurance deductible. I remembered giving him $500 from my secret stash in the garage, thinking I was saving the day. I looked at the entry in Martha's handwriting. It didn't say insurance deductible. It said settlement. October 14, 2010. Lucas DUI hit and run. Victim agreed to settle out of court. Paid $200,000 to silence witness and cover medical bills. Wire transfer to attorney account. I stared at the numbers. $200,000. My son hadn't just bumped a car. He had hurt someone. He had been drunk. And he had come to his mother not for forgiveness, but for a bailout. And she had paid it, quietly, efficiently, while cooking dinner and asking me about my day. I turned the page, my fingers numb. There were more entries for Lucas. Failed business loans she paid off. Credit card debts cleared. But then I saw Emily's name. Emily. August 2015. I remembered that summer. Emily was crying on the porch saying her boyfriend, a man I never liked, had lost his job and they were going to be evicted. I remembered feeling helpless because I couldn't do more than buy them groceries. The ledger told a different story. Emily, gambling debts incurred by partner, threats of violence against them, paid $150,000 to private lender to ensure safety. $150,000 to pay off a bookie. My daughter, the one who had stuffed her mother's silver into a tote bag, had been saved from loan sharks by the very woman she was now robbing. I felt sick. I flipped through the pages faster. I saw Tanya's name. Tanya, the successful executive who looked down on me with such disgust. Tanya, March 2018. Corporate embezzlement accusation. Paid $50,000 to internal audit team member to suppress evidence and facilitate resignation without charges. Paid headhunter $20,000 to secure position at new firm. It was all there. Every success they bragged about was bought. Every disaster they avoided was paid for. My wife hadn't just invested in stocks. She had invested in keeping our children out of prison and out of the gutter. She had been the dam holding back the flood of their own selfishness and bad choices. I looked up at Paxton. The room felt ice cold. She knew, I whispered. She knew everything. She did, Paxton said, his voice serious. She told me once she realized early on that your children lacked your moral compass, Henry. She said they inherited her ambition, but none of your integrity. She knew that if she didn't clean up their messes, they would drag you down with them. She paid their debts to protect you, not them. She wanted you to retire in peace, not spend your golden years visiting your son in county jail. I looked back at the book. It was a museum of failures. My children weren't just greedy. They were damaged, and they had drained their mother for years, probably never knowing how much she truly had. Only knowing that if they pushed hard enough, the money would appear. But why hide it from me? I asked, the hurt cutting through the anger. Why let me think we were barely getting by? Because she knew you, Henry, Paxton said. You are a man of principle. If you knew Lucas had driven drunk and hurt someone, you would have made him turn himself in. If you knew Tanya had stolen money, you would have demanded she face the consequences. Martha loved you for that, but she also knew it would break your heart, so she carried the burden alone. She bought their freedom so you could keep your pride in them. I closed the book. The leather cover felt cold under my fingers. My pride? That was almost funny. I had no pride left in them. Whatever picture of a family I thought I had was gone, buried under ink and dollar signs. Paxton opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick document wrapped in blue paper. This is the last piece, Henry, he said. This is the Martha Caldwell Living Trust. He slid it across the desk. The deed to the house isn't in Lucas's name, Paxton explained. Tanya lied to you, or maybe they forged a document to scare you. The house, the stocks, the cash, everything is in this trust. And as of 3 days ago, you are the sole trustee and the primary beneficiary. I touched the document. What about them? I asked. Paxton leaned forward. Section 4, paragraph 2. It says no assets can be given to Lucas Caldwell, Emily Caldwell, or any of their spouses without the written permission of the trustee. That is you, Henry. You have full control. You can give them everything, or you can give them nothing. It is completely your choice. I leaned back in the chair. The power washed over me. For the last 48 hours, I had been a victim. I had been debris being swept away by their cruelty. But now the tide had turned. I held the keys to the kingdom. I held the deed to the roof over their heads. I held the ledger of their sins. I thought about the way Tanya had looked at me at the funeral. I thought about the nursing home brochure. They wanted to throw me away because I had no value to them. They thought the Bank of Martha was closed, so they were ripping out the fixtures. They didn't know the bank was under new management. I picked up the black ledger and ran my hand over the cover one last time. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I wasn't just a grieving husband. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I stood up. My knees didn't ache. My back was straight. The fog of grief that had clouded my mind for 3 days had burned away. Mr. Paxton, I said, my voice steady and low. I need to make a withdrawal. Not a big one. Just enough to buy a few things. Paxton smiled. Anything you need, Henry? I need a new suit, I said. I need a haircut, and I need a hotel room. The best one in the city. I looked at the blue trust document. And I need a lawyer, I added. One who enjoys a good fight. Paxton picked up his phone. I have just the man, he said. He is a shark, and he hates bullies. I nodded. Good, I said, because I have a lesson to teach, and it is going to be expensive. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, my children were probably congratulating themselves. They were probably counting the money they thought they would get from selling my house. They were probably laughing about how easy it was to push the old man out. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them enjoy their victory for a few more hours, because when the storm hits, they won't even see it coming. And this time, Martha won't be there to bail them out. This time, they answer to me. I drove back to the house in silence. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the street slick and black under the streetlights. I parked my car a block away, needing a moment to prepare for the performance of a lifetime. I looked in the rearview mirror. I messed up my hair, unbuttoned my collar, and rubbed my eyes until they were red and irritated. I needed to look broken. I needed to look like a man who had lost everything. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the small folded note Martha had left inside the black ledger. It was short, one sentence in her shaky final handwriting. Give them one last chance to be human, Henry. But don't hold your breath. I put the note in my pocket right next to the brass key. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump, letting the weight of the years settle back onto my frame. I wasn't the millionaire with a shark lawyer on retainer anymore. I was Henry the burden, Henry the problem. I walked up the driveway, dragging my feet. The house was blazing with light. I could hear music, upbeat party music. My wife had been in the ground for 3 days, and they were throwing a party in her living room. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled like pizza and cheap beer. Lucas, Tanya, and Emily were in the living room. They had cleared off the coffee table and covered it with brochures for new cars and vacation printouts. They were spending money they didn't even have yet. They froze when they saw me. The music stopped suddenly as Emily scrambled to hit pause on her phone. Tanya was the first to recover. She stood up, her face twisting into annoyed anger. Henry, she said, her voice sharp, we thought you were packing. The movers are coming tomorrow morning. You can't just wander in here and disrupt us. We are busy handling the estate. I didn't answer right away. I walked into the room and sank into the nearest chair, burying my face in my hands. I let out a shaking breath, a sound of pure despair. "What is it now?" Lucas asked, sounding more bored than worried. "Don't tell me you lost your wallet again." "It is worse," I said, my voice trembling. "I went to the bank." The room went dead silent. I could feel their eyes drilling into me. Greed has a feeling. It feels like a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. "The bank," Tanya repeated slowly. "Which bank? Did you find an account? Is there money?" I looked up at them, making sure my eyes were wet. "No," I said. "There is no money. I found a notice. A tax lien." Emily scoffed. "A tax lien? Mom paid the taxes. She was obsessed with them." "That is what I thought," I said. "But the bank manager told me there was a mistake. A filing error from 5 years ago. The penalties have piled up. The interest has exploded." I paused, watching them trade nervous looks. "How much?" Lucas asked, his voice tight. 50,000, I whispered. Tanya shrieked. It was pure, raw rage. She threw her wine glass against the fireplace, shattering it into 1,000 glittering pieces. 50,000, she screamed. "Are you kidding me? That stupid, incompetent old woman. She couldn't even die right. She had to leave us a bill." "Tanya," Lucas warned, glancing at me. "Don't you Tanya me," she screamed, spinning on him. "We were counting on the house money. We have debts, Lucas, real debts, and now we have to pay off the IRS before we can sell. She ruined everything. She is dead, and she is still ruining our lives." I watched her. I watched the woman who had eaten at my table for 15 years call my wife names. I watched my son say nothing to defend his mother. "It gets worse," I said. They turned to look at me, fear replacing anger. "The bank said because the debt is in both our names, and because I can't pay it, they are going to prosecute. They said, it looks like fraud. They said, if I don't come up with 50,000 by Friday, I could go to prison." I stood up and walked over to Lucas. I grabbed his hand. It was limp and cold. "Son, please," I begged, pushing every bit of desperation I could fake. "I can't go to jail. I am 70 years old. It would kill me. You have to help me. You have savings, right? You and Tanya. Or maybe you can take a loan, just until we sell the house. Please, I am your father. Don't let them take me." Lucas yanked his hand away like I was dirty. He stepped back, putting the coffee table between us. "Dad, be serious," he said, his voice cold. "We don't have 50,000 lying around. That is why we need to sell this place, and we certainly can't take out a loan for your tax problems. We have our own credit to worry about." "But I will pay you back," I pleaded. "Once the house sells, if it sells," Tanya cut in. "Who knows what other mess Martha left behind? The house might be worthless if there are liens on it." "No, absolutely not. We are not throwing good money after bad." I turned to Emily, my baby girl, the one I used to carry on my shoulders. "Emily, honey," I said, "please, I am scared." Emily picked up her purse and hugged it to her chest. She looked at me with a mix of pity and disgust. "Dad, I can't," she said. "I have the kids. I have expenses. 50,000 it is impossible. Maybe you could sell something." "Sell what?" I asked. "You already took the silver. You took the jewelry. I have nothing left." "Then figure it out," she snapped, her mask cracking. "Sell a kidney. Join a medical trial. I don't know, but don't look at us. This is your mess. You and Mom made it. You fix it." I looked at them, really looked at them. The test was simple. Help your father when he needs you most. Save him from prison. And they failed. They didn't just fail. They failed eagerly. They didn't care if I went to jail. They only cared that my debt might cut into their profit. So that is it, I said quietly. You are just going to let me go down. We aren't letting you do anything, Tanya said, pulling herself together. You did this to yourself by being clueless, by letting Martha handle everything without supervision. Ignorance has consequences, Henry. She walked to the front door and flung it open. Cold night air rushed in. And honestly, she said, if you are in legal trouble, we can't have you staying here. If the police come, we don't want to be involved. We have reputations to protect. She pointed into the darkness outside. You need to leave now.
Esther here.
You are kicking me out tonight. Tonight, Lucas confirmed. He walked past me into the hallway. I heard him rummaging in the closet. He came back holding 2 black garbage bags. He threw them at my feet. Here are your clothes, he said. I packed them while you were gone. Everything from your room is in there. I looked at the black plastic bags. My life, my clothes, my memories, shoved into trash bags. Where am I supposed to go? I asked. Shady Pines has emergency intake, Tanya said. Or a shelter. Honestly, Henry, at this point, it is not our problem. You are a grown man. Act like one. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was strong and painful. She dragged me toward the door. I didn't fight. I let her pull me. I wanted to feel the full weight of their betrayal. I wanted to remember her fingernails digging into my arm through my coat. She shoved me onto the porch. Lucas followed, tossing the garbage bags out after me. They landed with a wet thud on the concrete. Give me your key, Tanya demanded, holding out her hand. I reached into my pocket. My fingers touched the brass key to box 404. For a second, I almost smiled, but I pulled out the house key instead. The key to the mortgage I had paid. The key to the door I had painted. I dropped it into her palm. Good luck, Henry, she said. She slammed the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. Then I heard the chain lock click shut. I stood there on the dark porch, staring at the wood grain of the door. I listened. From inside, I heard laughter, relieved, harsh laughter. Can you believe him? I heard Tanya say, trying to stick us with his debt. Unbelievable. He will be fine, Lucas said. He always lands on his feet. Or he doesn't. Either way, the house is ours now. I picked up the garbage bags. They were heavy and awkward. I walked down the steps and down the driveway to my car. I opened the trunk and threw them in. I stood by the driver's side door and looked back at the house. It glowed warmly in the night. Like a safe place I was no longer allowed to enter. But as I looked at it, the sadness I had carried for days began to lift. It faded like mist in sunlight. They had judged me. They had decided I was worthless. They had decided I was disposable. But they had made a fatal mistake. They assumed the game was over. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key again. I held it up to the streetlight. It flashed in the dark. A promise of payback. I wasn't the pathetic old man they thought I was. I was the trustee. I was the landlord. And I was about to bring the ceiling down on their heads. A cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just realized the sheep have locked themselves in the pen with him. Enjoy the house, kids, I whispered. Keep it warm for me. I got into my car and started the engine. I didn't look back as I drove away. I wasn't going to a shelter. I was going to the Ritz-Carlton. And tomorrow I had a meeting with a lawyer who was going to help me turn their world into ash. The test was over. The lesson was about to begin. The valet at the Grand Pittsburgh Hotel didn't even blink when I pulled my rusted, mud-splattered sedan up to the front entrance. He opened the door with the kind of professional deference that money buys, treating my old coat and garbage bags of clothes like they were designer luggage. I handed him a 100 bill from the thick stack in my pocket and told him to keep the car close but out of sight. Walking through the gold-leafed lobby felt like stepping into another world. The air smelled like fresh lilies and old money. I walked up to the front desk, my spine straight and my eyes clear. I didn't ask for a room. I asked for the presidential suite. When I slid my new black debit card across the marble counter, the concierge raised an eyebrow for half a second before typing quickly and handing me a heavy electronic key card with both hands. "Welcome home, Mr. Caldwell," he said. An hour later, I was a different man. I had taken off the damp, humiliating clothes of the beggar my children thought I was. I had scrubbed the grave's dirt and the old house's grease from my skin in a shower with 6 different spray jets. Now I stood at a floor-to-ceiling window in the penthouse, wrapped in a plush white silk robe that felt like a cloud on my skin. In my hand was a crystal glass filled with Cabernet that cost $500 a bottle. It was rich and complex and tasted like dark berries and victory. I took a sip and looked out at the city lights below. Somewhere down there in the dark suburbs was the house I had built. But from up here it looked small, almost meaningless. I turned away from the view and walked to the oversized velvet sofa. I picked up the new iPad I had bought from the hotel's business center. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. I sat down and tapped the screen, opening the app for the hidden security cameras I had installed months ago when Martha first got sick. I had installed them to watch her caregivers, to make sure she was safe when I ran errands. My children didn't know they existed. They didn't know the smoke detector in the living room and the motion sensor in the hallway were watching them. The feed loaded, grainy, but clear in night vision. I watched, sipping my wine, as the inside of my old home flickered onto the screen. It was chaos. They weren't celebrating anymore. The pizza boxes were shoved onto the floor. The music was gone. Lucas and Tanya moved through the house like a pair of rabid raccoons. They were tearing the place apart. I watched Tanya in the master bedroom. She ripped the sheets off the bed I shared with Martha for 40 years. She shook out the pillows, flipped the mattress on its side, and sliced open the box spring fabric with a kitchen knife. She was looking for cash. She was sure that if there was a tax lien, there had to be hidden money somewhere to pay it. Her face was twisted with ugly greed. She looked frantic, sweating, her hair wild. I switched the camera view to the living room. Lucas was there with a crowbar. He was prying up the loose floorboard near the fireplace, the one I had meant to fix for years. He ripped the wood up with a rough grunt, shining a flashlight into the crawl space. Finding nothing, he slammed the board against the wall in rage, leaving a deep gouge in the plaster. "Nothing!" I heard him yell, his voice tiny through the iPad speakers. "There is nothing here, Tanya. The old man is broke. He really is broke. Keep looking," Tanya screamed from the bedroom. "Check the vents. Check the toilet tanks. Old people always hide money in the toilet." I watched them destroy the home Martha had kept spotless for decades. I saw Emily step into view. She was in the dining room pulling china from the hutch and throwing the plates she didn't think were valuable onto the floor, smashing them. She looked for taped envelopes behind drawers. It was disgusting. It was a violation. Watching them ruin my home should have crushed me, should have made me cry. But sitting there in my silk robe, surrounded by luxury, I didn't feel sadness. I felt proof. Every broken plate, every slashed mattress, every hole in the wall proved Martha was right. Proved Paxton was right. And it proved I was doing the right thing. These weren't children who made a mistake. These were scavengers tearing meat from a carcass. They didn't care about the house. They didn't care about the memories. They only cared about what they could take. I took another sip of wine, savoring the last taste. I had seen enough. The test was over, and they failed so badly there was no doubt left. I closed the camera app and opened my contacts. I scrolled to the number Paxton had saved in my phone earlier that day. Attorney Strickland. It was almost midnight, but Paxton said Strickland was the kind of lawyer who slept with his phone in his hand. I pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "This is Strickland." "Mr. Strickland," I said. "This is Henry Caldwell." My voice sounded deep and steady in the quiet suite. "Mr. Caldwell," Strickland said, his tone sharpening instantly. "Paxton told me you might call. I have the files open in front of me. Have you made a decision?" I looked at the iPad's black screen. I thought about the garbage bags on the driveway. I thought about the nursing home brochure. "I have," I said. "How do you want to proceed?" Strickland asked. "We can file a simple eviction in the morning, give them 30 days, or we can negotiate a departure." "No," I said, cutting him off. "No negotiations. Number 30 days. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. "Activate Article 4 of the trust," I ordered. There was a short silence on the other end. I heard pages turning. "Article 4, Strickland repeated, his voice dropping. "The immediate liquidation and recovery clause. Mr. Caldwell, you understand this is the nuclear option. It authorizes the immediate recall of all informal loans classified as debts in the ledger. It triggers immediate foreclosure on any trust property occupied by non-beneficiaries. It freezes any assets linked to the estate. It will destroy their credit. It will lock them out of bank accounts if they are co-signed. It is aggressive." I looked out at the city lights one last time. I pictured Tanya slamming the door in my face. They threw my clothes in the mud. "Mr. Strickland," I said softly. They changed the locks while I was still standing on the porch. "Aggressive is exactly what I want." "Understood," Strickland said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. He was a shark, and I had just spilled blood in the water. "I will have the papers filed at the courthouse when they open at 8 a.m. The sheriff will serve the eviction notice by noon. The bank freeze will happen at the same time. They won't know what hit them." "Good," I said. "And Strickland." "Yes, sir. Make sure the eviction notice says they are responsible for any damage to the property. I have video of them destroying the inside. I want every scratched floorboard and broken plate added to their debt." "Consider it done," Strickland said. "Sleep well, Mr. Caldwell. Tomorrow is going to be a very busy day." I hung up and set the phone on the marble side table. I finished my wine in one long swallow. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the last chill from the rain. I walked to the massive king-sized bed. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, crisp and cool. I took off my robe and climbed in, sinking into the mattress. Felt like floating. For 6 months, I had slept with one eye open. Worried about the heating bill, worried about Martha's health, worried about my children. I had carried the world on my shoulders, thinking I was weak, thinking I was failing. But tonight, the weight was gone. I wasn't the victim. I was the hammer, and tomorrow morning the hammer was going to fall. I closed my eyes. The image of the shattered wine glass faded. Tanya's screaming faded. All I heard was the quiet hum of the city and the steady beat of my own heart. I didn't dream of my children. I dreamed of Martha. In the dream, she stood at the bank door, young and beautiful, with a ledger in one hand and a sword in the other. She smiled at me, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled back. I slept. It was the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had known in years. 3 days later, I sat in the high-backed leather chair at the head of the conference table in Attorney Strickland's office. The room was made to intimidate. It sat on the 42nd floor with a sweeping view of the skyline that screamed power and influence. The table was a slab of polished mahogany long enough to land a small plane on. The air was cool and smelled like lemon oil and expensive coffee. I ran my hand over my trousers. They were part of a charcoal gray Italian wool suit I had been fitted for just 48 hours ago. The tailor had worked a miracle, rushing the changes for a large fee that I paid without blinking. I wore a crisp white shirt, a silk tie in deep crimson, and hand-stitched leather Oxfords that cost more than my first car. My hair was trimmed and styled. My face was clean-shaven, and for the first time in years, I smelled like sandalwood instead of sawdust. I looked at my reflection in the dark window glass. I didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked strong. He looked dangerous. Strickland sat to my right, lining up a stack of files with the care of a surgeon ready for an operation. He checked his watch. "They are late," he noted calmly. "It is a power play. They want you to wait." "Let them play," I said, swirling the espresso in my cup. "They think they are coming for a victory lap. Let them take their time." I wasn't impatient. I had waited 45 years for the truth and 3 days for justice. A few late minutes meant nothing to me. 10 minutes later, the heavy double doors swung open. I heard them before I saw them. Tanya's voice spilled through the reception area, loud and sharp. She was laughing. "I told the dealership to hold the Cayenne," she was saying. "I put 5,000 down on the card this morning. Once the check clears from the house sale, I will wire the rest."
Red interior, obviously.
They walked into the room like they owned it, bringing noise and entitlement with them. Tanya led, wearing sunglasses indoors and a dress too bright for someone grieving. Lucas followed, smug in a polo shirt and khakis. Emily came last, texting furiously, probably telling her friends she was about to be rich. They were so confident, so sure of their place in the world. They didn't even look at the head of the table at first. They were too busy eyeing the expensive decor, guessing how much lawyer fees would cut into their profits. "Okay, let's get this over with," Tanya announced, tossing her purse onto the table. "We have a meeting with the realtor at 2. Just give us the papers to sign for the house transfer and we can—" She stopped. She had finally looked down the table. Her eyes landed on me. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. She saw a man in a 3000 suit sitting in the power seat, and her brain couldn't match that with the father-in-law she kicked onto the street 3 nights ago. She blinked. She pulled off her sunglasses. Her mouth fell open. "Henry?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. Lucas and Emily turned fast. They stared at me. Their eyes widened. They took in the suit, the shoes, the haircut, the way I sat calm and in control. "What is this?" Lucas stammered. He forced a short, nervous laugh. "Dad, what are you wearing? Did you rent a tuxedo or something? Who are you trying to impress?" He looked at Strickland, then back at me, shaking his head. "You look ridiculous," he sneered, trying to get control again like a kid playing dress-up. "Did you spend your last Social Security check on a rental just to come here and beg for money again? Because the answer is still no, Dad. We aren't paying your tax lien." I didn't answer. I didn't blink. I just looked at him with a calm, unshakable stare. I let his insult hang there until it sounded desperate instead of clever. I took a slow sip of espresso and set the cup down with a careful clink. Then I turned my head slightly and nodded to Strickland. It was a small motion, but it changed the whole room. Said, "I am in charge." Strickland cleared his throat. It was loud and commanding, cutting through Lucas's mocking like a knife. "Sit down, Mr. Caldwell," he said, pointing to the chairs across the table. "You too, Mrs. Caldwell and Ms. Caldwell. We have a lot to cover, and my hourly rate does not pause for personal insults." Tanya stiffened, but she sat. Lucas and Emily sat too, confused and uneasy. They lined up like kids called into the principal's office. "We are here," Tanya said, crossing her arms defensively. Because you said you found a will. We assumed Martha died intestate since we couldn't find one in the house. But it doesn't matter. The house was transferred to us via power of attorney before she died, so that is done. We just need to clear up any leftover accounts. Strickland opened the thick blue folder in front of him. He didn't even look up. Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, that is incorrect, he said, smooth and cold. The power of attorney document you are referring to was superseded. 6 months ago, when Mrs. Martha Caldwell received her terminal diagnosis, she came to this office. She established the Martha Caldwell Living Trust. She transferred all her assets, including the deed to the property at 42 Elm Street, into that trust. Tanya frowned. Okay, so the house is in a trust. Fine. We are the heirs. Just dissolve the trust and distribute the asset. It is the same thing. Strickland finally looked up. He took off his glasses and folded them on the desk. He looked at them with pity and predator-like patience. I am afraid you are deeply mistaken about the nature of this estate, he said. You seem to believe the house is the main asset, and you seem to believe you are the beneficiaries. Lucas leaned forward. The house is the only asset, he said. Mom was a housewife. Dad is broke. The house is worth maybe $400,000. That is it. I watched them. I watched the ignorance behind their eyes. They had lived their lives thinking they were smarter than us, thinking we were simple and clueless, while they were the advanced modern generation. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Strickland pulled one sheet of paper from the file and held it up. Your mother was not just a housewife, he said. She was an investor, an exceptionally smart one. For 45 years, she managed a diversified portfolio of securities, real estate, and bonds. He paused, letting it sink in. Emily laughed nervously. Mom? Investing? She clipped coupons for tuna. She did, Strickland agreed, because she understood the value of $1. Unlike some people in this room, he set the paper on the table and slid it toward them. According to the audit completed last Friday, Strickland said, his voice firm with finality, the total value of the assets held within the Martha Caldwell Living Trust, including accumulated dividends and the current market value of the real estate, is $28,450,000. The silence after that was complete. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. Tanya's eyes bulged. Her face went from flush to chalk white in a second. Lucas's jaw dropped. Emily made a small choking sound. 28, Tanya whispered. Million, Strickland confirmed. They froze. They stared at the paper. They stared at me. The truth hit them like a freight train. The old man they kicked out. The man they mocked 5 minutes ago. I was sitting on a mountain of gold. I watched Tanya's mind flip from shock to greed. I watched her do the math, 28 million divided by 3. I watched her upgrade the Porsche to something even bigger in her head. She looked at me, and her face changed instantly. The sneer vanished. A wide, shaky smile appeared. Oh my God, Henry, she breathed. This is a miracle. She was a genius. We are rich. We are all rich. She reached across the table, her hands stretching toward mine. Dad, Lucas stammered, his voice shaking. You knew? Is that why you're dressed like that? I didn't take Tanya's hand. I didn't answer Lucas. I just watched them, my face hard as stone. Strickland cleared his throat again, pulling their attention back to him. I believe you missed the second part, he said. I said the assets are in the trust. I did not say you are the beneficiaries. Tanya's hand froze in midair. What do you mean? She snapped. We are her children. Who else would be the beneficiary? Strickland picked up the trust document and flipped to page 2. According to the terms of the trust, he read, The sole trustee and primary beneficiary, with full discretion over distribution of all assets, is Mr. Henry Caldwell. He looked at them over the paper. The children have no claim, he said, unless Mr. Caldwell chooses to give them one. The room went silent again. But this time it wasn't shock. It was terror. They looked at me, and for the first time in their lives, they didn't see a father or a victim. They saw the man who controlled their future. And they remembered Friday night. They remembered the trash bags. They remembered the locks. I leaned forward. The leather chair creaked. I rested my elbows on the table and steepled my fingers. I believe we have some business to discuss, I said, my voice low and steady. And I believe you are sitting in my chair. Tanya stared at Strickland like he had spoken another language. The words sole beneficiary bounced around the room, but she refused to accept them. She stood up so fast her chair flipped backward, slamming onto the floor like a gunshot. "That is impossible," she screamed, her voice high and cracking. "He is senile. He is confused. Just 3 days ago, he came to us crying about a tax lien. He thought he was going to prison. He doesn't know what day it is, let alone how to manage an estate. You cannot give him control. He is incompetent." She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face twisted with panic. "Look at him," she shouted. "He is a retired engineer with no money. He lived off his wife. He is useless. This trust is a mistake. It has to be a mistake." Strickland didn't blink. He waited for her to stop yelling, his expression bored. He adjusted his glasses and looked at her over the rim. "Mr. Caldwell is not senile, Mrs. Caldwell," Strickland said calmly. "In fact, before this trust was finalized, Mrs. Martha Caldwell required a full competency evaluation for her husband. We have 2 independent affidavits from leading neurologists confirming that Henry is of sound mind and fully capable of managing his affairs." He paused, a small cold smile on his lips. "As for the tax lien story," Strickland continued, glancing at me with a respectful nod, "that was a test. A made-up situation designed to measure your loyalty and compassion. A test, I might add, that you failed with spectacular cruelty." Tanya's mouth snapped shut. The color drained from her face until she looked dead. She looked at me, and I saw the truth click in her eyes. The crying, the begging, the desperate plea. It was an act, and she had walked straight into it. Lucas made a low, wounded sound. He stared at me, his eyes wide with anger. "You lied to us, Dad," he whispered. "You tricked us." I didn't answer. I didn't owe him an answer. Strickland slid another document across the table toward them. It hit the wood with a heavy slap. "Now, about your current living arrangements," Strickland said, his tone turning sharp. "Since the property at 42 Elm Street is owned by the trust, and since you have no lease and are living there without the trustees' consent, your presence is considered trespassing." He tapped the paper. "This is a formal notice to vacate. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings and leave the property. The locks will be changed tomorrow at noon. Anything left after that will be considered abandoned and will be disposed of at the trustees' discretion." 24 hours? Emily gasped, clutching her chest. But where will we go? We gave up our apartment. We moved in to help Mom." "You moved in to save rent," I said, speaking for the first time. "And you didn't help your mother. You watched her die while you waited for the money." Strickland wasn't finished. He pulled out the black ledger and set it in the center of the table. It looked small and harmless, but to them it must have looked like a bomb. "Your mother was a meticulous record keeper," Strickland said. "She tracked every major disbursement she made to each of you over the last 20 years. The settlements, the bailouts, the hush money." He opened it to a marked page. "According to the trust, these disbursements were not gifts," Strickland said. They were interest-free demand loans, loans that became due upon her death. He looked at Lucas, $200,000 paid to settle a hit and run in 2010. He looked at Emily, $150,000 to settle gambling debts in 2015. He looked at Tanya, $75,000 for legal fees and corporate restitution in 2018, plus other loans totaling $25,000. The room went silent like a grave. They stared at the book like it was cursed. They knew. They remembered every dollar. They just never believed they would have to repay it. The total debt owed to the estate is $450,000, Strickland said, snapping the book shut. Mr. Caldwell, as trustee, has directed me to call these loans in immediately. He slid 3 demand letters across the table, one to each of them. You have 30 days to repay the full amount, Strickland said. If payment is not received, we will sue. We will place liens on your wages, your vehicles, and any other assets you have. We will freeze your accounts. We will garnish your future earnings until every cent is repaid. That was the final blow. I watched it hit. I watched their arrogance crumble into dust. Tanya slumped in her chair, eyes empty. She had already spent money she didn't even have yet on a car she couldn't afford. She was finished. Emily began to cry, soft, hopeless sobs, because she knew she couldn't pay. She knew she would lose everything. But it was Lucas who broke completely. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, slid out of his chair. He didn't sit. He didn't stand. He dropped to his knees on the thick carpet. He crawled toward me, grabbing my jacket with shaking hands. "Dad, please," he begged, tears pouring down his face. "Dad, I am sorry. I am so sorry. We were wrong. We were stupid. Please don't do this. I can't pay that back. It will destroy me. Dad, please. We are family." I looked down at him. I looked at the man who threw garbage bags at my feet in the rain. I looked at the man who drank my anniversary wine and called it vinegar. I searched for love. I searched for real regret. But all I saw was fear for himself. Fear of being poor. I stood up. Lucas's hands slid off my jacket. I smoothed my suit. I picked up the black ledger and tucked it under my arm. "You are right, Lucas," I said quietly, but my voice filled the room. "We are family, and family teaches the hardest lessons." I turned to Strickland. "Proceed with the filings," I said. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," Strickland replied, bowing his head slightly. I walked toward the heavy double doors. I heard Tanya whisper my name, but it sounded far away, like a ghost. I heard Lucas crying on the carpet. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked out past the receptionist and into the elevator. When the doors closed and cut off the sound of their downfall, I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel victory. I felt something heavier. Peace. It was finished. The debt was called in. The balance was restored. I was alone in the elevator, but I wasn't lonely. I had my dignity. I had my wife's legacy. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. The following week was a blur of legal motions and fast, brutal justice. I didn't have to do anything. Strickland and his team handled it all like a precision strike. I sat in my new living room, wide and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, and watched the updates come in. It felt like watching a controlled demolition. The first pillar to fall was their fake rich life. Tanya was at the Porsche dealership, ready to finish the paperwork for her red Cayenne. She strutted in demanding VIP treatment, already ordering people around. When she handed over her debit card to pay the rest, she expected it to work. She expected the money she moved from her joint account with Lucas to cover it. But the machine beeped, declined. She tried another card, declined. She screamed at the salesman, calling him incompetent, until she checked her banking app. Frozen. Every account in her name, every joint account with Lucas, was locked by court order. Strickland had filed the lawsuit to recover the $450,000 debt, and because they had no real assets to secure it besides cash, the judge approved an emergency freeze. The dealership manager, a man she had insulted minutes earlier, politely told her to leave. She lost the deposit. She lost the car. And for the first time in her adult life, she lost her dignity in public. She had to call a friend for a ride because her rideshare app was connected to the frozen card. The second pillar fell 48 hours later. The eviction. I wasn't there to watch, but the sheriff's report was clear. At exactly noon on Tuesday, deputies arrived at 42 Elm Street. Lucas and Tanya hadn't packed. They were in the kitchen arguing, surrounded by half-filled boxes and empty wine bottles. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I wouldn't really throw my son out. They were wrong. The deputies gave them 15 minutes to grab the basics. Tanya tried to lock herself in the master bedroom, screaming about squatters' rights and elderly abuse, ironically trying to claim the same protections she denied me. They were marched out the front door, the same door they shoved me through less than a week earlier. The locksmith came right behind them, drilling out the locks before they even reached the sidewalk. Their belongings, expensive clothes, electronics, and furniture they hadn't destroyed, were left inside, seized as collateral for the debt they owed the trust. They stood on the curb with a few suitcases, watching the house they had already sold in their minds get sealed shut against them. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. The humiliation was complete. The final pillar to collapse was their marriage. It didn't take long. Hard times show you who people are, and they were built on greed and convenience. Without my wife's hidden money holding them together, they fell apart. Tanya didn't stay to help her husband. She didn't offer to face it together. She blamed him. She screamed that he was a loser, a mama's boy who couldn't even secure his inheritance. She packed her suitcases into a friend's car and left for her mother's house in Ohio within the hour. By Thursday, Strickland got notice from her lawyer. She was filing for divorce. She tried to distance herself from the debt, claiming she didn't know about the loans Lucas took from his mother. It wouldn't work. Martha's ledger was exact. Tanya's signature was on the receipts. But it ended the trio that had tormented me. Lucas was left alone. No wife, no home, no money, no mother to rescue him. He ended up sleeping on an old drinking buddy's couch in a cramped Southside apartment. It was nothing like the suburban comfort he thought he deserved. On Saturday morning, my building's security intercom buzzed. It was the concierge. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, polite but firm. "There are two individuals here to see you, a Mr. Lucas Caldwell and a Ms. Emily Caldwell. They say they are your children. They are causing a bit of a scene. They are demanding to come up." I walked to the intercom panel and pressed the video button. The screen showed the lobby entrance. There they were. Lucas looked wrecked. He wore the same clothes from the lawyer's office, now wrinkled and stained. He hadn't shaved. He looked 10 years older. Emily stood beside him, her eyes swollen, her makeup smeared. She looked terrified. They argued with the big man in the blazer guarding the elevators. "Please," I heard Lucas beg, his voice cracking. "He is my father. I just need to talk to him. Just 5 minutes. We have nowhere to go. Please." I watched them. I watched their desperate posture. It looked exactly like me in my own living room, begging them for help with a fake tax lien. The symmetry was perfect. But unlike them, I didn't feel pleasure. I didn't feel like mocking them. I felt distant. They were strangers now, strangers who happened to share my name. I pressed the talk button. "Send them away," I said. The concierge nodded. "Mr. Caldwell does not wish to see you," he told them. "You need to leave immediately, or we will call the police." Lucas looked up at the camera. He knew I was watching. He pressed his face near the lens. "Dad!" he screamed. "Dad, I know you are there. Please, I am sorry. I will do anything. I will work it off. Just don't leave me like this. Tanya left me, Dad. She took everything she could carry. I am alone. I am your son." I didn't answer. I didn't buzz the door open. I just watched. "Wait," I said to the concierge before he ended the feed. "Give them a message for me." "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. Tell them this," I said. "Tell them independence is the late gift I am giving them. Tell them Martha isn't here to fix this, and neither am I." The concierge repeated the message. I watched the words hit Lucas like punches. He sagged against the glass door, sliding down until he sat on the pavement. Emily covered her mouth and cried. Security eventually led them away from the entrance. I switched the camera to the outside view. It had started raining again. A cold Pittsburgh drizzle. Lucas stood across the street, staring up at the building, searching the windows for me. He looked small. He looked soaked. He looked exactly like I did in the cemetery, lost and abandoned. But there was a difference. I was abandoned because I cared too much. He was abandoned because he cared too little. I stood there for a long time watching my son cry in the rain. It was sad, yes, but it was necessary. He had to break so he could rebuild, or he would stay broken. That was his choice now. My part in his story was finished. I turned away from the screen and walked back to my desk. The black ledger sat there, closed. Beside it was a new leather notebook, blank and waiting. Picked up a pen. I had work to do. I had a foundation to plan. I had a legacy to build. And I had a Monday morning appointment to keep. It has been exactly 1 year since I stood in the rain at the cemetery and watched my life fall apart. Today, the sun is shining over Pittsburgh. It is a bright, crisp Monday morning. The kind of day that makes the steel and glass of the city look like diamonds. I adjusted the rearview mirror of my car. It is not the rusted sedan I used to drive. It is a silver Mercedes, solid and reliable, much like the life I have rebuilt. I pulled into the reserved parking spot in front of First City Bank. The spot has a small plaque with my name on it, but I don't park there because of pride. I park there because I have work to do. I walked into the lobby, and it felt very different from that terrifying morning 12 months ago. The security guard, the same man who once looked at me with suspicion, tipped his cap and held the door open. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell," he said with a real smile. I greeted him by name. I know everyone's name here now. I walked past the teller line where Jessica was training a new employee. She looked up and waved. I waved back. I wasn't just a customer anymore. I wasn't just a legacy client. I was family. I took the elevator up to the executive floor. Paxton was waiting outside the conference room. He looked older, maybe a little more tired, but his eyes were still sharp. He shook my hand warmly. "Good morning, Henry," he said. "We have a full docket today. The board is already seated." I nodded and straightened my tie. I wasn't wearing a funeral suit today. I wore a navy blazer and slacks, comfortable but authoritative. We walked into the boardroom. It was the same room where I ended my children's greed, but it felt lighter now. The ghosts were gone. Around the table sat 4 other people. A lawyer, a social worker, a community organizer, and a retired judge. They were the board of directors for the Martha Caldwell Foundation, or as we called it, Martha's Hope. I took my seat at the head of the table. In front of me was a stack of files. These weren't stock certificates or deeds. These were applications, stories of people who were broken just like I had been. "Let us begin," I said. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed cases. There was a 70-year-old woman in the Hill District whose grandson had forged her signature and taken a reverse mortgage on her home. She was facing eviction in 3 days. "We can stop that," I said, signing the authorization form. Get Strickland on the phone. Have him file an injunction. Pay the arrears, and get her a security system. Next was a young man, a structural engineering student at the university, who was about to drop out because his father gambled away his tuition fund. He had straight A's. He reminded me of myself 50 years ago. Full of dreams, but empty pockets. Full scholarship, I said without hesitation. Pay it all. Books, housing, everything. But tell him he has to keep that GPA. Martha would have demanded standards. Case after case, we worked through them. We were a safety net for people betrayed by the ones who should have loved them. We were the shield Martha had been for me, but bigger now. Every check I signed felt like a conversation with her. Every person we saved felt like another brick placed in her memory. Near the end of the meeting, Paxton slid a folder toward me. It wasn't an application. It was a status report. I opened it. It was a short update on Lucas and Emily. I didn't interfere in their lives anymore. I didn't send money, but I watched from far away, mostly to keep them away from the foundation. Lucas was working at a distribution center for a shipping company, driving a forklift. The report said he had perfect attendance for 6 months. He lived in a studio apartment, paying his own rent and buying his own food. In the surveillance photo, he looked tired, but not destroyed. He looked like a man finally learning what it means to earn his place. Tanya had completed the divorce and moved to another state, chasing another dream of easy money. Emily had moved to a smaller rental and worked as a receptionist at a dental office. She paid her debts $1 painful at a time. I closed the folder. They were struggling. They were tired. But they were standing on their own 2 feet. It was the hardest thing I ever did, watching them fall, but it was the only way they would learn to rise. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I just wished them peace. The kind you only find when you stop expecting the world to hand you everything on a silver platter. The meeting ended just before noon. The board members shook my hand and left, and soon I was alone with Paxton. He gathered his papers and looked at me. "She would be proud, Henry," he said quietly. "You know that, right? She built the engine, but you're the one driving it." I smiled. "Thank you, Charles. See you next Monday." He left, closing the door softly. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. It was the same view I had seen from the hotel room on the night of revenge, but it looked different now. It didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like home. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and pulled out my wallet. I opened it to the small plastic window where I kept her photo. It was Martha from 20 years ago, standing in her garden, wearing a sun hat and dirty gloves, holding a basket of tomatoes. She was smiling that quiet, knowing smile. I ran my thumb across her face. For 45 years, I thought I was the provider. I thought I was the strong one. I thought I was protecting her from the hard world. I was wrong. She was the fortress. She was the general. She saw the storm coming decades before the first raindrop fell, and she spent her life building an ark so I wouldn't drown. My wife went to the bank every Monday for 45 years to prepare for this day. She didn't save me from being poor. Being poor is just not having money, and that is easy to fix. She saved me from something worse. She saved me from the cruelty of my own flesh and blood. She saved me from the shame of being thrown away. She saved me from becoming a victim. I put the wallet back in my pocket, right next to my heart, and I will live worthy of every single cent she left behind. I turned from the window and walked out of the conference room. I walked down the quiet hallway, past the paintings of the old men who built this city, and into the elevator. When the doors opened into the lobby, sunlight poured in through the glass entrance, bright and warm. I buttoned my jacket. I lifted my chin. I walked across the marble floor, my footsteps steady and confident. I wasn't Henry the burden. I wasn't Henry the victim. I was Henry Caldwell, the steward of Martha's Hope. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped onto the sidewalk. The air was fresh and smelled like spring. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the promise of the future. I walked toward my car, ready for whatever came next, stepping into the light, finally free. Henry's story is a sharp reminder that money doesn't change people. It simply shows who they really are. Sometimes the people we trust most turn out to be the cruelest, while the quiet sacrifices of the people beside us go unnoticed until it is almost too late. Never underestimate the power of silence and patience. More importantly, dignity isn't found in your bank account, but in how you stand up after being betrayed. It is never too late to reclaim your life, set firm boundaries, and teach ungrateful family members the hard, necessary lesson of standing on their own 2 feet. What do you think about Henry's revenge? Was he too harsh on his own family? Or was this the expensive lesson they desperately needed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe right now so you never miss the next emotional life story.